I am feeling really thankful to be here with you all today and to belong to this community that encourages all kinds of voices to share the word. I think it's very special that we get to walk the path together. So let's pray. Loving God, I give thanks for the gathered community here today. Prepare our eyes, ears, hearts, hands, and minds to receive your word. May we be open to your transformative love in the intentional spaces we enter and in the in-between spaces we find ourselves in. Amen. When I was in early high school, our music department took the band and choir kids on a tour from Newcastle up the mid-north coast. This was a wildly exciting school excursion that involved mostly just teen angst everywhere, all the time. And in my experience, music students tend to be very good at the angst thing. And then paired with the occasional good musical performance in old public school halls. We hired this really big double-decker bus that became our home for the week while we travelled around to the different towns. The resounding memory I carry of this trip is the politics of picking who you would sit with on the bus for the longer parts of the journey. Obviously, the kids who had the iPod Touch were the most important to befriend because they had music and games. I only had an iPod Shuffle, which meant there was no screen, and I found myself at the bottom of the pecking order and needing to secure a place next to an iPod Touch kid at the top of the pecking order. So you couldn't ask too early because that would make you look desperate and uncool, but you couldn't leave it too late either because someone else might beat you to it. And the unspoken rule was that bus buddies was only a 24-hour agreement. It reset every day. Having a spot today did not guarantee you one tomorrow. So you picked a friend who you had enough of a relationship with that you knew they might say yes. Then you would time the question carefully and with the most nonchalant, cool air that you could muster. Now, I picture that James and John took their request to sit next to Jesus a little more seriously than a 13-year-old's request to sit next to someone on a bus for 3 hours. At least I hope they did. It's a bold picture painted by Mark of these two men asking Jesus, "Can we be first in line? Can we sit with you?" I imagine the brothers must have been feeling quite comfortable in their relationship with Jesus to be asking something like this. Or maybe they were naive and unaware of the weight of what it was that they were really asking for. I suspect it may have been the latter based on Jesus' response. Before we go any further, let's hear this story told in Mark again. The passage begins with a conversation. James and John are brothers and they are disciples, and they come to Jesus to ask a favor. Jesus encourages them to share what it is that they want. They say, "We want to be seated at your right and your left in your glory." Jesus says to them, "You do not know what you are asking for. Are you capable of drinking the cup that I drink or being baptized with the baptism that I face?" The men reply simply, "Yes, we are." Then Jesus almost does a 180. He turns around and he tells them, "The cup that you drink, I will drink, and the cup that I drink, you will drink, and the baptism that I am baptized by, you will be too. But as for being seated at my right and my left, that is not for me to decide. These places have already been prepared." I find the last part of Jesus' response mysterious. He doesn't give an obvious explanation as to who has done the preparing or who the places have been prepared for. Some literal interpretations of this verse suggest that Jesus is referring to the two criminals who will later be crucified next to him, one on his right and one on his left. So the passage continues. When the other disciples and people traveling with Jesus heard this, they were angry. So Jesus uses the moment as a teachable one, and he calls the whole group together. He says, "The leaders of others claim great power and lord it over the people below them. It will not be this way with you. If you wish to become great, you must become a servant, and if you wish to become first, you must become a servant of all. The Son of God came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life to set others free." Heavy, right? This passage begins with a conversation and ends with Jesus once more pointing to the cross. As I sat with this part of the text, it made me wonder, what were James and John expecting Jesus' response to their question would be? Perhaps they were thinking a pat on the back for being the first to ask, first in best dressed, like the iPod Kids bus partner. Surely it couldn't hurt to ask, right? When we hear this story, we come to it with the hindsight of knowing that the crucifixion and the resurrection were just around the corner. This could mean that we are assuming, when James and John refer to Jesus in his glory, they are talking about a Jesus that is somewhere else. Heaven, perhaps, or an imagination of the kingdom to come after the crucifixion. But these men in this story didn't truly know what was coming, despite how many times Jesus had foretold what was to happen. Maybe they expected this political Jesus standing in front of them to lead in ways that they were familiar with, the ways of other political leaders of the time. That is, to take power violently or with force. Maybe they anticipated Jesus would take power in a different and surprising way, but ultimately would assume an existing position of power in the earthly systems as they were at the time. Either way, this is a serious request. Serious in that it segregates the brothers from the community of followers that they exist in, and it calls for a reward greater than what the others around them will receive. And serious in that what they are asking for in reality is martyrdom at worst and persecution at best. But this isn't where I want to stay with the text today. I think it's instinctive to place ourselves in the shoes of James and John here, or to distance ourselves from them through criticism. But I think it's worth examining this reading with the intent to hear what comes from not only the content of Jesus' words, but also the way he says these words, including the 180 moment that I mentioned earlier. So let's start here. I don't think we are given what is beyond us. And I don't mean that in a trivial sense. God doesn't give us what we can't handle is an often unhelpful and potentially harmful phrase. It can be weaponized in a way that dismisses pain and invalidates a person's faith, or used as an excuse to avoid bearing witness to the very real grief of others. What I do mean is that in the story you may be familiar with, the story of how the Grinch stole Christmas, the Grinch's heart grows 3 sizes. Right at the end of the story, this grisly old Grinch experiences something transformational and his heart changes. And in the same way that his heart can grow 3 sizes, so can our hearts. It doesn't have to be exclusively just at Christmas time though, so stay with me here. My heart grew 3 sizes when I moved into Epworth, Leichhardt's Intentional Christian Community, the building standing next to me right now. When I was living in my family home, feeling that I had all of the love I could possibly hold, I stepped into a place that completely expanded my world. And I didn't lose any of the love that I had before. I grew 3 sizes. I have heard people describe having children in this way, the way your world can expand immeasurably when you become a parent. Or the way we meet new people and form relationships later in life when we have become comfortable and we think we are done with the growing and done with the holding new love. It is as if we don't know our hearts can love like this until they do. The Grinch doesn't expect his heart will grow 3 sizes. In fact, I think he probably expects the opposite will happen. He expects that he will stay the same. Much like the caterpillar doesn't know who it will be when it is finished, it just gets on with the business of growing and transforming and emerging. So we enfold what we already have, the love we have, or the wisdom we have, or the grief we have, and we grow around it. When we think we are done, we are not. If there is one thing this community has taught me, it is that I am so much more capable of learning love and growing in faith than I ever expected I could be. So maybe the phrase, God doesn't give us what we can't handle, in today's passage actually means Jesus looks at James and John and sees that they are capable. Jesus initially says to the brothers, "You do not know what you are asking." And look, they likely didn't get it. They were signing themselves up for something so completely different to what they could ever envision. I don't think James and John could have ever truly known what was to come and what they would have been capable of, or if they would have even believed it. But here comes that 180 moment. Jesus looks at these men that he knows, these men that he is in relationship with, and says, actually, yes, you will drink from the same cup as me. You will be baptized as I am. And it will be completely different to what you expect. It will be so categorically different, so different in the very fibers of its makeup, that what you expect to be first will actually be last. This order that you have been taught, this hierarchy or way of things that you have inherited, will be entirely reimagined. You will redefine everything you think you know. And, not but, and you are capable. You are capable. Capable doesn't always mean ready, or that we will get it right all the time. It doesn't even necessarily mean qualified, really. But there is an invitation for us in Jesus' response to the brothers and to his gathered community. The invitation we hear echoing through Jesus' teachings in this verse and elsewhere is to both reimagine and redefine power. In reimagining, we engage our creativity and we dare to shake the foundations of power that we see our world built upon. The same foundations of power that James and John's world was built upon. In the act of reimagining, we almost take the power from power itself. It is a creative and deconstructive task that cocoons us within glimpses of the kingdom of God. Once we are in the reimagined space, then the work of redefining can be done. Redefining is where we bring forward the kingdom. Redefining is emerging from cocoon imaginations. It is the faithful, gentle, and repetitive act of declaring to the world this subversive version of power that Jesus tells us is possible. It is how we show up, drums in our hands and banners over our heads, proclaiming loudly, there is an alternative. Towards the end of the passage, Jesus gathers the community around him and names the powers that be. Then he says, "But it is not so among you." Friends, how is it not so among us? How have we reimagined and redefined power this week? How will we do it next week, next month? How do we enfold this radical vision of the kingdom into our relationships, into our homes, into our work, our faith? How do we unfold it into our action? I definitely find it challenging. It is no small feat, especially given what this year has looked like for our local and global communities. But what I see before me and what I feel with me via the magic of live stream is a community that is entirely capable. Capable of creativity in our visual arts, in our music, in our gardens. Capable of change, changing within by adapting to an unpredictable world with grace and resilience, and changing the world we live in by speaking truth into the public sphere, speaking truth to power. Capable of love that grows and transforms and welcomes. We are capable of reimagining and redefining. And that gives me so much hope. Amen.